It is a posterior section of the intestine consisting typically of 4 regions: the caecum, the colon, the rectum, and the anus. The term colon is sometimes used to refer to the entire large intestine. It frames around the small intestine on 3 sides. The large intestine or large bowel is the last part of the digestive system in vertebrate animals. Its function is to absorb water from the remaining indigestible food matter and then to pass the unabsorbed waste materials from the body. The large intestine consists of the caecum, the ascending colon, the transverse colon, descending colon, and the sigmoid colon, and rectum, and opening to the outside via anus. It starts in the right iliac region, the pelvis, just at or below the right waist, where it joins to the bottom end of the small intestine. Here it is joining with the ileum. Ileum opens into the caecum, the pouch-like part of the large intestine, through the lleocecal valve. The chyme, after absorption and digestion in the small intestine, enters the caecum through the lleocecal valve. The large intestine is about 4.5 feet or 1.5 meters long. That is about 1/5 of the whole length of the intestinal canal. The large intestine is subdivided into 4 main regions, as that is already said: caecum, the colon, the rectum, and the anus. Then there are so many sac-like structures in the large intestine, divided into sacs. They are all called hostra. The singular is hostrum. The small pouches caused by sacculation, which gives the colon a segmented appearance. The taenia coli, the longitudinal muscles. There are 3 bundles of this, the taenia coli, start from the caecum till the end of the rectum. This is shorter than the total length of the large intestine. So as a result, the large intestine is constricted like an elastic band, and that forms the pouches. So this is different from the small intestine. The circular force of small intestine is, it covers the total circle of the small intestine. But in the case of hostra, it is not fully and extending throughout the circle of the large intestine. When this chyme enters into the caecum, that part of the large intestine enlarges. So this pressure, this increases the pressure in that part, that stimulates the muscles to contract. So the contraction of the muscle pushes the chyme forward. So this is the entry of ileum into the caecum. The lleocecal wall controls this entry. Then anal position. The colon begins at the ascending colon, a retroperitoneal structure. As I said in the previous part of the intestinal tract, the colon is a retroperitoneal structure. That is, it is seen behind the peritoneal wall. Then transverse colon. When it meets the right lobe of the liver, the ascending colon meeting the right lobe of the liver, there is a 90-degree horizontally. This turn is known as the right celiac flexure or hepatic flexure, and marks the start of the transverse colon. The transverse colon extends from the right celiac flexure to the spleen, to the other end. The spleen is here, from here to here. where it turns another 90 degree to point downwards. Here it another 90 degree and it is pointing downwards. This turn is known as the left celiac flexure or splenic flexure. Here the colon is attached to the diaphragm by the phenocolic ligament. The phenocolic ligament. The transverse colon is the least fixed part of the colon. So, and is variable in position. This colon is the attachment of this part of the colon to the wall of the abdomen is quite less. So it is quite freely to move. So in the case of lean people, this can go down to the pelvic area. The transverse mesocolon is a broad mesofold peritoneum that binds the transverse mesocolon is a broad section of the peritoneum that binds the transverse section of the large intestine to the abdominal wall. The descending colon, that is the next part. After the left colic flexure, the colon moves inferiorly towards the pelvis, is moving towards the pelvis, and is called the descending. It is also retroperitoneal in majority of people, so seen behind the peritoneum, but is anteriorly to the left kidney, passing over its lateral border. Then sigmoid colon. When the colon begins to turn medially, this is turning medially, it becomes the sigmoid colon. This is around 40 centimeters long. Is located in the left lower quadrant of the abdominal or viscera. That gives the sigmoid colon, it's a characteristic S shape. That is why it is called sigmoid colon. Is attached to the posterior pelvic wall by the sigmoid mesocolon. The long length of the mesentery permits this part of the colon to be partially mobile. This sigmoid mesocolon is quite long, so it allows the sigmoid colon make it very flexible. The large intestinal wall, it is quite different from the small intestinal wall. The mucosa is the innermost layer. This is the mucosa. This layer is the innermost layer of the large intestine, and it surrounds the lumen of the large intestine. Unlike small intestine, the mucosa here is free of villi. There is no villi and has a soft surface. The surface is very soft. Made up of single-layered columnar epithelium. The columnar epithelium has secretory cells in between that secrete mucus into the lumen of the intestine. This will help in the movement of the food material through the colon without any obstruction or resistance. Next to the mucosa lies the layer of blood vessels. These blood vessels and nerves are found in this layer, and this is the submucosal layer. There is a muscularis mucosa in between the mucosa and submucosa. Then there is the muscular layer. So the inner circular muscular layer and an outer longitudinal muscle layer. And as I said before, the longitudinal muscle layer in the large intestine is seen in 3 taenia, coli. And outside the muscle layer is a serous layer made up of a single layer of epithelial cells. They secrete serous fluid into the abdomen, which also reduce friction when this part of the gastrointestinal tract is moving. Then omental appendices. At the surface of the intestine are omental appendices, small peritoneum filled with fat. They are found along the sides of the taenia, coli, and also called epiploic appendages or appendices epiploic. Appendix. And so the large intestine differs in small intestine in several ways. The large intestine is much wider and the longitudinal layers of the muscularis are reduced to three strap-like structures known as taenia coli. Each of this bundle is about 0.2 inches wide and can be identified. There are three bands starting at the base of the caecum and extending to rectum. So the next structure is appendix. Formerly it was called as vermiform appendix, like because it looks like a worm. It's a vestigial hollow tube that is closed at one end, the other end is closed, and is attached to the caecum. A pouch, this is a caecum, this is a pouch-like beginning of the large intestine, into which small intestine is emptying its content. The appendix is usually 8 to 10 centimeters long and less than 1.3 centimeters wide. The cavity of the appendix is much narrower than the large intestine. And the cavity is narrower than the large intestine. Also, where it joins the large intestine, it is further narrower. Appendix is has got muscular walls. These muscles help to push the mucus secreted in the muscles into the large intestine, as well as if any chyme enters this appendix, this is also pushed outside by these muscles. Then the function of the appendix. There are still controversies regarding or disagreement regarding the function of the appendix. There are certain suspected functions. It allows the growth of microorganisms and multiplication of the microorganisms, and it acts as a storage of this microorganism. If the microflora of the gastrointestinal tract is washed away by some means, like when you are using antibiotics, etc. After that, it is restocked by the microflora from the appendix. Then it provides a site of endocrine cells in the fetus that produces molecules important in regulating homeostasis. Also serving as a possible role in immune function during the first 3 decades of the life. This here the leukocytes are exposed to the contents of the intestine. So some of these act as antigen and induces the production of or causes immune response. It helps to modulate the immune reaction in the gut. While specific function of the human appendix remain unclear, there is a general agreement among the scientists that the appendix is gradually disappearing from the human species over evolutionary time. Blockage of the appendix can lead to appendicitis, a painful and potentially dangerous inflammation. If anything blocks this opening of the appendix, so it cannot expel the mucus produced or any chyme enter into the appendix. So that is blocked. The common obstruction is the fecal matter can enter, get solidified at the opening of the appendix into the caecum. When the appendix is prevented from emptying itself, a series of events occurs. Fluids and its own mucus secretions collect in the appendix, leading to edema, swelling, and distension of the organ. As this distension increases, it presses the blood vessels and the pressure increases, and the blood vessels gets closed off. As a result, blood supply to appendix will be stopped. This leads to necrosis or death of the cells in the appendix. So when the appendix cells are dead, the inflammation will be worsened. The appendix weakened by necrosis and subject to increasing pressure because of the accumulating mucus and other fluids. It will be distended and it will be burst, and the contents of the appendix will be released into the abdominal cavity and infecting the membranes around. So in this worsens the situation. Fortunately, peritonitis is usually prevented by the protective mechanism of the body. The omental, the fat sacs around the large intestine. A sheet of fatty tissue often wraps itself around the inflamed appendix. So the inflamed appendix will be covered by the omentum, and it secretes glue-like substances. It seals off the appendix from the surrounding peritoneal cavity. So because of that, the content will not be released into the surrounding. The innervations of the large intestine. Like the small intestine and the rest of the gut, the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system are involved in the neurogenic working of the large intestine. The vagus nerve from the 10th spinal nerve imparts parasympathetic pulses to the large intestine. And also the pelvic splanchnic nerve also do the parasympathetic innervations of the large intestine. The thoracolumbar nerves from the 10th thoracic vertebrae, from here T10 thoracic vertebrae to the L2 vertebrae, are responsible for the sympathetic inhibitory actions of the large intestine. So these nerves from the T10 to L2, so they are responsible for the sympathetic inhibitory actions. These nerves form three synapses, namely superior mesenteric synapse or ganglion, then inferior mesenteric ganglion, and celiac ganglion. The inferior mesenteric plexus stimulates the colon from the point of left colic flexure and then to the rectum, the inferior. Then arterial blood supply to the large intestine. As a general rule, midgut derived structures are supplied by the superior mesenteric artery, and hindgut derived structures are supplied by the inferior mesenteric artery. The ascending colon receives supply from two branches of the superior mesenteric artery. The middle colic artery and the right colic artery. And also ileocolic artery is supplying the ileum and the caecum. The descending colon is supplied by a single branch of the inferior mesenteric artery. Descending colon supplied by a single branch of the inferior mesenteric artery. The sigmoid colon is supplied by sigmoid artery, that is also from inferior mesenteric artery. And the superior rectal artery supplies the rectum, which is also from inferior mesenteric artery. So it is mainly supplied by superior mesenteric artery and inferior mesenteric artery. The anterior structures are supplied by superior mesenteric artery, that is the caecum and the caecum, then the ascending colon and the transverse colon. The inferior mesenteric artery supplies descending colon, sigmoid colon, and the rectum. The marginal artery or Drummond. The marginal artery of Drummond is a clinically important vessel that provides collateral supply to the colon, thereby maintaining arterial supply in the case of occlusion of or stenosis of one of the major vessels. So if any of the major vessels mentioned in the previous slide is occluded, this marginal artery come into play. As the terminal vessels of the superior mesenteric and inferior mesenteric artery approach the colon, they split into many branches. So the superior mesenteric artery and inferior mesenteric artery split into many branches which anastomose with each other. These anastomoses form a continuous arterial channel which extends the length of the colon. So, continuous arterial channel. The marginal artery. Long, straight arterial branches called vasa recta arise from the marginal artery to supply the colon. The venous drainage. The venous drainage of the colon is similar to the arterial supply. Here it is superior mesenteric vein and inferior mesenteric vein. As in the case of superior mesenteric vein, drain from the caecum, ascending colon, and the transverse colon. That is the right external iliac vein, that is going to ileum. Then common iliac vein is also going to ileum. Then the inferior mesenteric vein, that is supplying the draining from the descending colon, sigmoid colon, and the rectum, similar to arterial supply. Then lymphatic drainage. The lymphatic drainage of the ascending and transverse colon is into the superior mesenteric nodes. The descending colon and sigmoid drain into the inferior mesenteric nodes. So similar to the arterial and venous drainage. So here it is the superior mesenteric node as well as the inferior mesenteric node. So the ascending colon and transverse colon will be draining into the superior mesenteric nodes, the lymphs. The lymph from the descending colon and sigmoid colon drain into the inferior mesenteric node. Most of the lymph from the superior mesenteric and inferior mesenteric nodes passes to the intestinal lymph tracts and on to the cisterna chyli, where it ultimately empties into the thoracic duct. Thank you.